Hello everyone, and welcome to my second tutorial video. In this video we're going to be covering Substance Painter, and I'm just going to go over some of the basic functions, how to import your model, how to actually do some of the texturing, how the masks work, and then we're going to export your textures at the end. First thing you'll probably notice is that my layout, my workspace, doesn't look the same as your default one. I have an extra wide monitor that I normally use, so I keep everything to the side wings here. But thankfully, rearranging your workspace in Substance Painter is super simple. So if you go to Window and Views, you can turn on and off which settings you want, or which windows I suppose you want to see. And they'll normally just drop here like this. And then it's just a matter of grabbing it and moving it to where you want. I'm going to leave my right side like that. I like having my properties as its own bar. So once you've set up your workspace how you like, then we're going to start a new project. So go File and New. I'm going to be exporting these for both Maya and Unreal. So I'm just going to leave it as Unreal for now. And where it says File, you click Select. And if you remember from the last video, when we exported our barrel, we moved it to the Assets folder in our Project folder. So I'm just going to go here, and I've got two versions, one for Color ID and one without. I'm going to do the one without first. And so we'll just select our low poly version here. The normal map format is set to DirectX because the first one we're doing is Unreal Engine, which uses DirectX for the normals. If I was going to be exporting to Maya, I'd be using this PBR metallic roughness setting, and I'd have this set to OpenGL. Selecting it right now isn't a big deal, as we can change that later when we actually go to export. I'm going to leave my resolution at 2048. You can set it to whatever you need here. A lot of the times you have to keep in mind the how much information like Unreal Engine is going to be calling on for all your different maps and stuff like that. Simple barrel, I'm just going to go 2048. We don't need it to be 4K high res, and we don't need to scale it down for anything. So then we'll just hit OK, and it will load in our model. So a bit of the controls for Substance Painter. So hold Alt and left click, and you rotate around. Alt and middle click lets you pan. And if you hold Alt and right click, you can zoom in and out. You can also zoom in and out with the wheel. Additionally, if you hold Shift and right click, you can move the light source. So, and you can see on the left, I've got my model. On the right is my UVs. And so the first thing you want to do anytime you bring in a model is bake it. Even if if you don't have a high poly version and you're just using a low poly model with no actual high poly version, you still want to bake it. Baking will make it so a lot of the mask editors and curvature generators, a lot of the other things in Substance Painter reads that geometry from the bake. So if you don't bake, they won't work. So first thing we're going to do is bake. So if you go to your texture set settings, again, I've changed my layout, so yours might be somewhere else. If you don't see your texture set settings anywhere, you can just go up to Window and View and right here, and then just bring it in and dock it somewhere. So we're going to go down to Bake Mesh Maps here. And so you want to turn on kind of as many of these settings as you can. You can do them one at a time if your computer isn't very good. My computer can handle all of them, so we're just going to do them all at once. For the output size, we're going to use the same as we used for the original document size when we created the folder or the file. And then down here, so if we were not going to use a high poly mesh, we'd click this box to use low poly mesh as high poly, and then it just bakes the object to itself. In this case, we did make a high poly version, so I'm just going to hit this little file icon here and grab my high poly and hit OK. And so you can see this kind of like new shape around. So this is the cage, and the cage determines how close your bake is going to be and how accurate. So you always, and honestly, this visualization thing is something they just added within the last like year, if that. And it is great. You always had to like guess with your cage distance before. So you want to bring your frontal distance down as small as you can without seeing any of the red. So if you see this red, then it means that your high poly mesh is going through your low poly, and you will see a lot of weird shadows and interactions. So always make sure you've got your frontal distance up enough to avoid that. The rear distance kind of works with like the inside of the mesh, and as you can see, it doesn't really change a whole lot as you adjust things. And it's honestly something that I rarely even touch. I just leave it at the default. So once we've got our high poly mesh brought in and we've double checked to make sure we have all the right settings. Additionally, if you happen to click on one of these, it changes your map settings here, or your menu here. Just click common settings up at the top to get back to the original page. But once we're done, we are going to hit bake selected textures. And then it just takes a minute for it to write all the new information onto your model. And then we just hit return to paint mode. And our high poly model is, pretty close to our low poly. There's not a whole lot of difference. So you're really not seeing much. You can kind of see this little bit of deformation here, which is one of the reasons I was telling you in the last video to make sure that you have that your high poly or your low poly things like cylinders are really rounded, because these are some of the artifacts and issues I was talking about that you'll encounter if you've got like too low poly on your actual model. I'm going to be okay with this for now. It doesn't have to be perfect, so I'm not going to go back and tweak it. However, if you did want to go back and tweak it, you can, but say you've already done something on your model. Yeah, so say you've already had a bunch of layers, you've already made it, upgrade or added a bunch of work to it that you don't want to lose. If you go to Edit and then Project Configuration, you can go right here where it says Select and reselect your model. So if for some reason that those little artifacts had bothered me and I wanted to tweak the object a bit more, I could go back to Maya, change it up, and then re-export it, and just I could make a new file or overwrite it, whichever I wanted. But re-export it and then come into here and select the one that you've tweaked. And then when you hit OK, it will change your model for you. Sometimes you will have to rebake, depending on if the high poly changed or how much your actual geometry changed. We're not actually going to do that with this because this will be fine for our purposes today. So let me delete this layer. It always starts off with this layer 1. Just go ahead and delete it. So we're going to be making this into a wood pattern. So we're going to go to our layers panel, and we're going to click here to add a fill layer. So as you can see, our fill layer comes in. It's just blank gray, and it's got all these settings here that you can change. If there was, for instance, say you wanted ambient occlusion on this material, but you're not seeing it here. So if we go back to our texture set settings, where it says channels here, we can hit the little plus and just add whatever we want. So there's, translucency, emissive, displacement, and I'm just going to add ambient occlusion here. Additionally, if you were doing something that was like a toon shader or something that doesn't have any metal, you're not going to need metallic for anything. You can just hit X, get rid of whatever channels you don't want. Okay, so we come back to our layers. And so for our first fill layer, we're not going to need any metallic on this layer because this one is just going to be our wood. So same within Maya, and you're using your outliner, always make sure you're relabeling things, especially in Substance Painter, because you will end up with like 10 different layers that all say fill layer, and then you either have to recognize it by like the effects and masks that are on it or by like the picture. So I highly recommend getting into the habit of naming them. So you can see at the bottom here you've got all of our different materials and smart materials. So the smart materials often end up coming in with a set of existing parameters that you can change. So for instance, like if I bring in, let's see what this stylized wood looks like. That's a bit too much. Let's go with this stylized wood rough. So I have a few options when I bring in a material. I can just bring it in to my layers, drag and drop it. It creates a new layer this way. If I want to add it to an existing layer, you can see here in the properties where it says material mode. So we can just drag and drop it there. And so it's going to override any other previous settings we had for things like height and normal and all that stuff. I'm just going to make this a bit bigger. And so first thing we can see is that the scale on this is way off. So we're going to go at the top of our properties bar in the UV transformation section. You can see tiling. And as we change this, it's going to increase or decrease depending on what we're doing until we get the size that we want. You can use the slider bar or just enter a number. One thing to watch out for, as you start increasing your tiling, you'll start to see more repeated patterns. So like for instance, as you can see, this like light band that goes across is getting repeated. Some of these cracks are like identical and getting repeated. So sometimes it's unavoidable. You always want to try to like do your best to hide those though, if you can. I'm going to go with 8 on this one. We'll call that good. So all the materials that you pull out of this search bar will come with a whole bunch of different parameters here. And so there is often a fair bit of kind of tweaking to get what you want. And when you get to working with Substance Designer, you'll learn how to actually make these patterns and textures yourself. That controls some knots. And I'm not going to mess too much with this. And I'm going to call that good for my base for my wood. So as you'll notice, this is applying the texture to everything, but we've got these metal bands that we don't want this texture on. So you can create, if you right click on your material, you'll create, or on your layer, you'll create a black mask. And so the black mask is going to hide everything in the scene. It works very much the same as the masks in Photoshop do, where black is hidden and white is visible. I'm actually going to clear this mask, sorry, not clear, remove the mask. And I'm going to add a white mask instead. And then to our white mask, we can add a paint layer. And then using this paint layer, if you scroll down on your properties, so when you select the paint layer, it shows you the properties for your brush. If you Same with on the mask, it shows the properties for your brush. If you go back to the material node, then you can get the properties for your materials back. So we're going to go to the paint layer. And if you look at the bottom, you've got your grayscale. So you can use just black or white and then just paint on. And so I'm painting black right now. So anywhere I paint black, our texture is being hidden. And so you can see it like completely gets rid of all the normal height, all that information. Instead of painting, because right now we just want to like kind of block out these. So instead of trying to like paint over the whole thing, if we go on the left side here, the fifth icon down is called Polygon Fill. And it lets you see your wireframe, and you can just click and drag. And so these are all blacked out now. So nothing that we add to this wood material or any changes that we make to this material are going to show up on our bands. One thing you want to keep in mind, however, is that sometimes your material is going to have several different layers just for the wood part. So you can create a folder that will allow you to do the same thing without actually masking the individual layers. Because say if I put another layer to add the grooves in there, or another layer for dirt or edge wear, I'm going to have to create the same mask and mask out each one. So instead, we're going to create a folder for it. So we can hit create the folder at the top here. Alternately, you can just right-click and nope, no, I lie. You can't create a folder by right-clicking. Sorry, my mistake. So we're going to create the folder, and then just click and drag to drop our wood into this folder. And then we're going to change this to wood. And we're going to do the same thing. So we're going to add, it doesn't matter if it's a black or a white mask. We're going to right-click, copy this mask, and then go back up to our folder and paste this into the mask. So now we can actually remove the mask that's on this layer. And the folder is going to be creating our separation of materials for us here. So now it doesn't matter how many other layers we add on top of our wood, none of it will show up on our metal pieces. So we've got our base color or our base material on our wood. And admittedly, this is a very over-stylized type of wood. It's not super realistic. Oops, I do not want 32. Just wanted to bring it up a little bit. No. There we go. That'll be fine. And so one thing our barrel is lacking here is that these should all be separate boards, right? Separate slats that run up and down. So we're going to create those slats. So we're going to add a new fill layer, and then we're going to add a black mask. This time, however, instead of adding paint layer or anything like that to it, we're going to look in our assets, and we're going to look for a tile generator. Which I had to come over here to textures, not in my materials. And then we can see this one here, this tile generator. And then we're just going to drag it and drop it onto our mask here. And so we can see it's created basically a square brick pattern. The tile generator we can change, however, in our pattern transformation. So we only want one separation for the top. We can adjust our scale. A lot of these um, numbers, it'll say like 1 where it caps out, but you can manually change that. Just because it says 1 as the max doesn't mean that's actually the max. You can almost always go over. Um, and we're actually but we want it to go the other way. There we go. So all these white lines, which I've just intentionally left this white so it's a bit easier to see. But all of these white lines are going to be part of the barrel. So one thing you can see is that they don't quite line up exactly on the inside, which that was my mistake when we did our UVs, is that you can see that this UV shell isn't quite the same size as this one. I wasn't thinking, I should have extended that out. So that's actually going to bother me. So I'm going to quickly go back to Maya and readjust that. Okay, so I've gone back to Maya and just readjusted my UVs real quick. So we're going to actually get to do that re-import. So if you hit re-import mesh, you will lose all the work you've done on your layers. So we're going to go to project configuration instead. And then we're going to reselect our file and then hit OK. There we go. And so you can see it just quickly updated our UVs and our model. And perfect. Now all our lines are matching up like we wanted. So and we actually doesn't look like we need to rebake. Well, maybe we do. Let's do that anyway, just to be safe. So as you remember, our texture set settings and go to bake mesh maps. Yes, it's cleared our high definition mesh here. So let's just rebake that. Oops, I forgot to hit the height and bent normals, so I'm just going to hit those and rebake again. And then we'll return to our painting mode. Now, the bake with this, our high poly bake, doesn't have much extra detail or anything of the sort. So we really don't need to worry too much about how it's coming out. It's pretty simple. But if you did have things like, say you put rivets around these bands, you could have those on the high poly, but then not have them on the low poly. And they'd still show up as like in part of the normal map. Additionally, something like that you can totally add while in Substance Painter and just fake it. You don't actually need to model it or do anything like that. So now that we've got our updated UVs and all our lines are flowing, so these lines are supposed to be, the grooves between our slats, right? But right now they're just white lines. And if you'll notice, this spot here, they're kind of misaligned a little, right? They're a little bit closer than the rest. And so that's just because of the tile generator here. So there are things you can do, like I can grab this edge and stretch it out, or even shrink it down in so we're getting more slats. We can just adjust it as we kind of see fit. And there we go. Those look all evenly spaced. So we're good for that. But like I said, we want these slats to, or these lines to actually be grooves in the wood. So what we can do is we can go to our material node, not on the mask, but on the actual material node itself. And we don't need a special color for these, but we do want to adjust, and there's no metallic on it. The roughness will be the same as the rest of the wood, but the height we want to bring down. And so you can see it just carving those grooves. You can go up with the height, have things stick out, but for this we're going to bring them all the way down, so it just kind of grooves in. And let's bring our ambient occlusion color down so things look a bit darker. So ambient occlusion acts as kind of like a self-shadowing. And on second thought, I will bring in our color and then just make it a bit darker. There. And so now it looks like we've got our slats that our barrel is made of. I'd even say they actually look a little bit too wide. So let's go back to our tile generator and bring them down a bit. There we go. A lot of the time in Substance Painter, you will be dealing with numbers that are like in the hundreds. So like, this one is 0.0.02 for the setting that we want. But this will be good for our wood. So one other thing we're going to want to add to our wood. This one is very stylized and already has a lot of wear and tear and damage on it. So I'm not going to do anything more to add to that. But let's add a layer of dirt. So we hit create a new fill layer, which again covers everything. So we're just going to create a black mask on our layer. And now we're going to use a generator. So if we right click on the mask itself, you have this list here, and we go to add a generator. And so these generators will do a lot of things automatically for you, but you do have to make sure you bake for them to work right. That was one of the things I was talking about earlier. And let's go with a dirt layer on this. And so for our dirt, we do want to go on triplanar, because then it'll really help to hide our UV seam that's running down that one side. And then let's adjust our level. We can adjust our contrast as well to see how much we want to fade it out. There's also a grunge amount that you can see runs over the body, and then the scale, which this grunge amount and scale, there is a grunge pattern that is applied to this dirt that it just uses and tiles to put over the body of the barrel. So like where it says use custom grunge here, we can hit true and then actually apply our own grunge map down here. Which just to show you how to do it, let's get rid of that. And so a grunge map doesn't have to be dirt. Anything with these black, that's just straight black and white, like any of these grayscale images, and they could all be your grunge map. You could even bring in one of these patterned ones if you want. Use custom grunge, true. See, we don't want that one specifically. But what's this? Grunge. Oops. Dusty powder, dusty powder. Dirt splats and smears. So you kind of have to, takes a bit of practice to know what you're looking for, what you want to see. I'm looking for something that's got a bit higher black and white. Let's look for, we got some smears. Or some smudges. Let's go with this smudge heavy, and then we can just drop that in our custom grunge. And you can see it's, changed the pattern. This grunge scale here scale's a bit of a misnomer. This adjusts your tiling. So as you can see, once I start getting high, you see that repeating pattern there. So I'm going to actually go to 2 on my scale, and then the grunge amount is actually more of, it works more like balance. So it increases and decreases the amount of white. We can adjust our dirt level and our contrast to see how much of it actually shows up. So there is a lot of fine tuning and tweaking. One thing you do really want to watch out for when you're using the generators, though, is that there's often places, especially with dirt ones, that it will fully fill, like the inside of this barrel here, for instance. You'll also notice it makes it rather uniform around the edges of things. And so if we wanted to, actually I'm going to get rid of that custom grunge. I don't like that. Just going to use the default one here. You'll also see actually there's a random seed that you can use, which will change the grunge pattern. But you'll notice those edge lines that are around the barrel itself aren't changing, or around the bands aren't really changing because they're determined by the dirt level and contrast. So when I hit random, those don't really change too much. I turn my contrast back down, my level down a bit. But additionally, you can kind of control things yourself a bit for how much the generators are producing on your objects. So for instance, if I want to reduce some of this, we can add a paint layer. And so what the dirt generator is doing is it's creating a mask. So as you can see, it's altered what our mask looks like here, because this was just a black mask when we started. And so by using a paint layer, we're basically just painting on the mask and changing what it looks like. I've got it on polygon fill now, but let's just switch back to our brush. And so for adjusting your brush, you've got all your settings for size, flow, opacity, jitter, all that stuff. Very, very similar to Photoshop, almost identical. The same with your shapes. So Substance Painter lists all your brush shapes as these alphas here. So you can just click there, and you can scroll through their massive list of things. There's different handprints and symbols and stuff like that. Or you can search for something that is going to be what you want. So I'm going to search for spots, because I want to use some dirt spots, because I'm going to be removing the dirt, but you still want to keep that dirt spotty pattern even though you're removing it. going to go with the stain, but let's adjust our spacing a bit. And so you don't want, this is dirt on it. Nothing's going to be uniform, so you don't want this like, exactly uniform pattern with your brush. So, we can adjust the spacing here, move it out a bit more, and then we're going to use some of the jitters. So let's adjust our size jitter so that it's not always going to be the same size. The same with our flow, so some will be lighter and darker. Let's adjust our angle so that the alpha shape is rotating as we go, and the position a little bit, so it's not exactly going to be in a straight line when we paint a straight line. One thing to keep in mind is you've also got an alignment here. So on tangent wrap, it's, oops, what do I set on? Oh, I'm black, okay. It's not really showing. Hold on a second. Okay, so sometimes it is just hard to see, especially when I have so much extra grunge on. But for this time, I've been forgetting to rename my layers. Slat grooves. Dirt. So you can paint on the actual object or on the UVs, whichever you would prefer. And then you can adjust your alignment to whichever is working best for you. So tangent and wrap kind of like puts it all together. Camera makes your alignment focus solely on like your view, and UV makes it focus solely on this flat UV. I find if you're trying to put a pattern like writing or some kind of specific pattern, like a corporate logo or something like that, I highly recommend using the UV alignment, as everything's all flattened out, so you'll put the flat image on here. Sometimes trying to stamp something like that onto the actual object can really mess up how the object or how the stamp looks, and like stretch it out in weird ways that you didn't want and stuff like that. Additionally, if you hit Control and move your mouse left or right, it adjusts the size of your, sorry, it's Control and right click, my mistake, and it'll adjust the size of your brush. Up and down adjusts the hardness of your brush. And I'm just going to clean up, that's too much. So we're going to bring our hardness down a bit, hardness and shape down a bit, and we're going to adjust our opacity and flow so we're not pulling everything off all at once. Let's put that up a bit more. And then we'll just paint over, and the inside of our barrel will then start to look a little bit less full. Let's turn our flow and opacity up just a little bit more. So unfortunately, in order to get kind of a believable pattern, something that like breaks up the edges a bit and stuff like that, you do have to sorry, my headset cut out there. So yeah, it does take a bit of time to, tweak it manually like that. Um, tangent ramp. My brush size down. We're just slowly removing little bits of dirt. And as you can see, I've left it as just a white for now. It's a bit easier to see when you're first setting it, but once you get close to kind of the pattern and the amount of dirt that you want, then we can go and we'll change our color of the dirt, which you know you always got to kind of keep in mind what the dirt is. This is just going to be generic grime, so I'm going to make it just a very dark brown. And is is this dirt going to be kind of like oily, and should I make it to be more to be rougher, or is it more of a dust and I should be bringing the roughness, or sorry, should I make it be oily and shiny, or should I make it be, is it a dust? Should I make it rougher so it's not reflecting as much? I think I actually am going to make it kind of oily, just because I like how that little bit there at the top looks. We don't need metallic on this layer. So every layer you want to readjust what you're using. Bring my ambient occlusion down so it darkens things up a bit more. And let's actually bring the height up just a little bit, because this is going to be some build up. Um, whereas the slats cut into the object, our our dirt is going to be something that builds up on top of it. All right. And then we'll go back and we'll readjust our levels a little bit here. Additionally, if you're not kind of getting what you want with the generators, you can always, just do a flat layer and then just fully using the brush completely paint in all of your dirt, or grime or whatever else you wanted to add. X will quickly switch from black to white for your mask, for when you're painting. And you'll notice as I paint over, I'm not getting any of this dirt on the actual bands and the metal parts, because we have that all masked out, like with our folder here. So it's only going to affect what's in the white. And I'm just kind of haphazardly throwing dirt around here, which I'm not going to spend any more time messing with that aspect of things. So we've got our wood, and I'm going to call that, actually, I'm not going to call that good enough. So most of the time when I'm texturing, I use a minimum of 3 layers. I'll have the base material layer, another layer for dirt, and then I almost always do a layer of edge wear, which I'm actually going to move this down and put this layer under our dirt. And so we add a fill layer and add a black mask, same as every time. And then we're going to add another generator, and I'm going to use metal edge wear, which it says metal edge wear. It's not always, it doesn't have to only be used on metal. So we're not going to actually need the metal. And our height is going to come down because we're going to be digging in. And our roughness is going to be, because it's wood, when things get chipped off and broken, the roughness kind of goes up. So it loses its shine. And then let's hop back over to our generator here. And so you can see it works very similarly to the dirt generator. Use triplanar again so that it helps hide our UV seams. And then we can control. So, very much the same thing. Level and contrast, grunge amount. And scale. Again, you can apply a custom grunge to it if you would like. This curvature weight setting, it measures the geometry, and you can see it like mostly at the edges, at the top and the bottom is where it adjusts. Just smooth this. So there's a lot of really small details that you can adjust. I'm going to call that one good enough. I picked the stylized wood, so it's very pitted and everything already. But you know what? I think that stylized wood was actually a bad idea. So let's go back to our materials. We'll use this one. It doesn't have as much roughness and other settings. So we're going to go back to our stylized wood material, and right here you can see we've got this material mode. So we're going to drag that and we're going to replace that there. Bring our roughness down so it's got a little bit of a sheen to it. It's got some built-in variation. Tiling's okay. Actually, additionally, one thing I forgot to mention, so I kind of lucked out that all the wood grain is running up and down on this. If my UVs were laid out in another way, and I had to adjust that, so you can see the little curve rotation icon here, and you can just rotate it like that. If you hold Shift, it snaps to, I think it's 15-degree increments, or 45-degree increments, sorry. Additionally, you can change the rotation value over here, and it will do the same thing. I'm just going to leave that 0 because we do not need that for this one. Again, we also don't need metal on this. And I'm just tweaking some of the settings. Again, every material has its own settings. So it kind of takes You've just got to play around with it, unfortunately. Which I shouldn't say unfortunately, but it takes some time to get used to it. Each material is a little bit different. Yeah, we'll keep with the stylized one here. That one looks a bit better. And you'll notice what I was just looking at, the channels and technical parameters are other ways to adjust things. You can turn on and off the channels for this specific material here. I'm going to be good there, but now I want to redo my dirt. So if we hide that paint level, it fills up the entire inside. So let's X for black. Let's just remove those big splashes I made. I'm not liking those now. It could be better, but let's call that good for now. I don't want to spend too much time messing around with just random little settings because honestly, I could spend forever just messing with those. And we'll actually bring our height down a little bit. It's looking like it's too pushed up. There we go. Now it just looks like some greasy, oily buildup in the edges. And we've got, this is our edgeware. So again, make sure we're renaming everything. And we want to make sure oh hell. Okay. So I accidentally applied our stylized wood to the wrong layer. So let's hit X. We'll get rid of that. Oops. Sorry. Wrong layer again. Always make sure you've got the right one selected. There we go. I was overriding our wood there. So click that. We don't need the metal. We'll copy the color of our base wood, but we're always going to want to make the edgeware a bit lighter, which I probably shouldn't say always. It really depends on what we're doing or what the material is. Like if this had been painted metal, for instance, that edgeware, it should be, silver and shiny underneath because, we've chipped away the paint. Right down. Let's adjust our wear level down. And as you can see with this one, just like with the dirt, it looks very auto-generated unless you alter it. So, like this is a very smooth edgeware edge. So I often take to adjusting the curvature weight and edge smoothness to kind of hide that a bit better. Put it a bit up. I don't want to spend too long messing around with things, so we're going to say that is good enough. Because as I said, I can spend hours just tweaking the tiniest little details. It's real easy to get lost in this. And so now we're going to need to do the metal bands. We're okay with how our lid looks, how our barrels, everything looks. We're good with that, I think. And so we're going to create a new fill layer. Oops. And we're going to drag it up to the top of our folder. We can just close that wood folder. We're not going to need it anymore. And we're going to create a new folder. This will be our metal. And put our new fill layer in that folder. And then again, on the folder, we're going to add a black mask. And then right click and add a paint layer. And then switch over to the polygon fill, because it's a whole lot easier than trying to actually paint it in. And we're going to paint that white. So the only part of our mask that we can see is these top 3 UV shells. That's all we're going to need for this. So when I was doing the wood, I used just one of the pre-made materials, which you honestly want to do more often than not. It will save you a lot of time. But for the metal here, I'm going to show you how to kind of create your material from scratch sort of thing. So on our fill layer, we're not going to need the normal or height on our base layer here. Honestly, we don't even need the ambient occlusion. So we want to have the metal turned all the way up. With metal, 98% of the time, it's either 0 or 1. You don't want to go part way through. There's a few types of metals that are only part way through, but really we're going to go 0. You're usually going to go 0 or 1. And then our roughness on our metal, we're going to make that somewhat shiny, nothing overdone. So we've got a base color here. Most metals, most steels anyway, actually do have a little bit of blue in the coloring. Not a lot, just the teeniest bit. And we're going to make this a little bit darker here. But at the same time, most metals aren't just one color. So we're going to add some color variation to this base flat color here. Okay, so to add our color variation to our metal, we've got our first layer, which we're going to call this our base color. And then we're going to add another fill layer. And again, for this fill layer, we're not going to need the normal or the height. The roughness we want to be the same as the base color, so we're going to turn that off. And the metalness we're going to keep on and turn all the way up. So for our base color, let's go with something that has a little more of an, or for, our base color for this variation layer, we're going to go with something that has a little bit more of a brownish red, almost like a rusty color to it. And then, now, this is covering the whole thing, which we don't want. So we're going to add a black mask to this layer. And then we're going to add one of our grunge maps to our mask. And so that's going to control where our color kind of comes through. And so keep in mind that this is it's the mask, so we're using a black and white grunge on it. And so, just like previously, anything that's white is going to be where we can see our color. Anything that's black, we're not going to be able to see. So let's just find one that looks okay here. And they're all labeled like cracked plaster, just grunge map 8, streaks, different things. So you just kind of have to you're going to have to experiment and figure out, what works best for whatever you're doing. Let's just go with grunge map 7 now. So I'm going to drag that and just drop it right onto our map. And so now we can see our grunge there. So we're seeing our black. Anywhere that it's white, we're seeing our deep color. The grays are kind of faded. But we can change the balance here and the contrast as well. Which I'm going to go with this, but again, this looks like spots on our metal. This isn't actually, it doesn't look like this is a color in our metal. So we're going to right click on our mask and we're going to add a filter. And then we're going to select our filter and we're going to blur this. We can go with just the standard blur if we want. But I think for this, I would actually rather use a directional blur. As we turn up our intensity, things kind of blend in a bit more. You can adjust the angle, and you can see how that changes there depending on what you want. I'm just going to leave it at 0 so that it runs the full length. And it looks okay. I'm not a big fan of this down here. So let's go back to our grunge and see, if we adjust the tiling, 5. Okay, that kind of blends it in a bit better, leaves us with fewer big splatchy places. I think we've got a bit too much actual color in here, so let's desaturate that a bit. That's all right. And then let's add another layer. So I'm actually just going to copy this layer. Well, I'm going to go Control D and duplicate this layer. And then we'll change the color. Make it much darker. And then let's change our actual grunge map on here so that they aren't just two of the exact same layers over top of each other. Let's try out this one instead. Bring our blur down a bit so we can see what we're actually dealing with. All right. I think that's going to be okay for now. And so, you know, that's given us some color variation in our metal, which might actually be a bit too much. In which case, we've got blend modes here, just like in Photoshop. And depending on what mode you put it on, will change what it looks like. So I'm going to leave this on normal, but I'm just going to turn down the opacity on it a bit. I'm going to do the same for both of these layers. Just because I feel like we were just getting a bit too much color, a bit too much variation. And now say if we wanted to actually, we did want to add some like height to our grunge. Let's bring in the height and the normal. I always use both together because we may not be exporting a height map from this, but we want the height for our adjustments and our control. And then any of that detail will be copied into the normal map. Let's see if we just bring it down just a little bit. Bring our ambient occlusion down a bit. And you can see now we're getting some like streaks that are kind of cutting into the metal a bit as well, giving it a bit of texture. You can go way down and have it grooved in, but you don't want that much. We just want to add the tiniest little bit of depth and texture to it. And we're going to say that's good on that. So one thing that I really should have done sooner and totally slipped my mind was to save this. So I'm going to do that now. We're going to hit File, Save As, and then if you remember that other folder we created, the project folder that we created for in Maya, we can go down to the source images, and there's a folder here automatically made that's titled 3D Paint Textures. So I always use this one. And I'm just writing no ID because we do have the color ID'd one that I'm going to bring in later. And okay, we've saved, so that's good. So now again, remember to rename all your layers as you go. So we've got our color variation, a little bit of height differences on there. We can even change the roughness for this. And so like this roughness is only affecting this one color. Same as if I turn it on to this one, it'll only affect that one color. It's a bit hard to see the difference because they are all blurred together now. But it's good to have some variations. Having a like strictly flat roughness all across your object is not going to look believable or realistic. You have to have some variation to it. Whether that just be where someone put their fingerprints or, places that are, for if it was a statue, for instance, you'd want places that get touched to be a bit smoother. Yeah, it really depends on your model, what you're working on. But we've got our color variation and our base color. So we're good there. So let's add another fill layer with a black mask, and then we're going to add our edgeware layer to this as well. So we go to generator and our metal edgeware. And so you can see it's came in quite heavy to start with. Let's go to our material layer. We want metal on. We want all of this on actually. And first thing we're going to do, we're just going to pull our height in a bit so we can see where we're cutting in and kind of how much of a difference this edgeware is going to make. And then we're going to take our base color and we're just going to copy our original base color, but we're going to make it lighter. Anytime metal gets gouged into or anything like that, it always ends up looking a bit brighter and even a bit shinier. So we're going to increase or decrease the roughness a bit here too. Oh, make sure our metallic is all the way up as well. Okay, so again, this is, we're getting a little bit too hard on the edges. So let's bring our curvature weight down. I bring my grunge scale down a bit and reduce the amount. So you can see that the grunge is just the parts that are in between all the flat surfaces sort of thing. So let's bring that down. We don't want a whole lot of that. We mostly want it at the edge with just like, the occasional little pits here and there. Nothing too major. And we can adjust our level and contrast. And I was saying, I always use the minimum 3 layers of base material, edgeware, and then dirt. But you can really you can layer this stuff on. You can have, 4 different layers to make up your edgeware if you want. By just using a series of, generators and then grunge maps as well. I'm just going to do the 1 for this one just for the sake of time. Additionally, one thing to be aware of is that you can invert your mask on these generators. So if I hit true, it flips it around so that everywhere that was cutting in is now the opposite. For this layer, you wouldn't want to do that, but I've found in the past that using the dirt generator, like we did here, using the dirt generator and inverting it is a really good way to do things like corrosion and rust. There is a rust generator on its own, but I've found for things like brass and copper that build up that patina that's kind of in the middle, not necessarily always on the edges and the corners, using a dirt layer and then inverting it is really good for doing things like that. Let's go back to our edgeware, and I'm going to call that good enough so that, again, I don't spend forever fiddling with it. Edgeware, and then we'll add another layer, and we'll add rust to this. So we're going to go add a black mask again, and add a generator again. And we've got dripping rust here. And so this already has some built-in things. Like I said before, you can use multiple layers of things to make your rust. In that engine that I made, steam engine that I showed you guys in the last video, the painted metal parts had like a layer for the paint, a layer for edgeware, and then I used, I want to say 2 or 3 extra layers to do the rust. So it breaks down the 1 layer where it's breaking down the paint. one layer where it's starting to like just lightly go into the metal, and then one layer where it looks like much deeper carved into the metal. So let's see here. We want to, we can change the amount of our rust spreading. Like, all these generators work very similarly. Let's increase the drip's intensity. I want to decrease the smoothness a bit so it actually looks like they're dripping. So turn up our contrast and down our spreading amount. And again, this just looks like flat white on top because I haven't changed any of our settings yet. So we want to actually turn off metal, as rust is not metallic in the way that it reflects light. So we turn off our metal mode. We'll change our color to kind of an orangey red. And like I said, you can do several layers for this. If this was an asset I was working on for like something for any of my own actual work, I would do multiple layers on my rust. I'd have one larger layer for the bigger splotches and then a smaller layer inside. So we're actually gonna pull the dripping intensity back a little and increase the spreading. Maybe even decrease the contrast. Okay. And then change our color so it's a bit more to the red. A little less saturated. And I actually made a mistake there. So you do want the metal layer on, but you want it set down to 0. So by turning the metal layer off, it means that this layer will have no effect on the metal layer or the metal information from the layers that are underneath it. So like while all these base color and color variations have our metalness turned up, we don't want metalness on this. So we turn on the layer, but we make sure that the metallic is set down, because we don't want our rust to actually be shiny and reflective or anything like that. And then rust eats into the metal, so we're going to bring that down a bit. It's also very rough. There we go. So now we've got our big rust shapes. And then in order to keep most of my settings the same, I'm going to duplicate this layer again. We're going to rename it to small rust shapes. Or just small rust, I guess. We're going to change the color so we're a bit more of that orange that rust gets. Going to bring the height down just a little bit and the roughness up just a little bit more. And then we're going to adjust our generator and bring some of those numbers down. So we'll increase the contrast. So really we should have all of our bright orange rust should sit inside of our more reddish rust, because these are going to be the deeper, more corroded points. So one thing you may also notice is the way that this kind of fades, that we don't really want that too much. We want it to bring that back up a little bit. We want that to look like a more distinct separation. So adjusting the contrast changes how the mask itself looks, but it doesn't change like the depth or our height. So one thing we can do is we can right click and we can add a levels node. And so this works just like the levels does in Photoshop, and we can bring our points together, and it kind of creates a higher contrast. So as we can see, like our red is, getting a bit more defined as we tweak this and bring it in together. And we want to make sure our levels is on top of the generator. I was just double checking that. Let's bring our orange spreading in a bit more. And I think we're about good for our rust there. So I think that's about good for our rust. We might actually be a little bit heavy on the rust, but I'm going to say that's okay for now. This will be an old barrel, which let's actually increase our dirt a little bit here. Just to reflect that a bit better. There we go. Nasty old barrel. And then we've got our small and big rust. So let's do another layer for our dirt. And I used the generators for doing the rust here. You could just apply a grunge mask if you wanted, or even just paint it on, and then so you could just paint on your mask, and then you can copy your mask and bring it to another layer, and then just use the levels adjustment like we did here, and bring down the layer so you'd have the two different, the like red rust and orange bits. But let's get rid of that paint layer because we're going to add another generator and do our dirt here again, which I'm doing two separate dirts. We could actually just drag the one dirt layer that we did here on the wood. We can just drag that and put it on top. If I can put it in the right spot, just got to get, there we go. And so now you can see it covers everything, and it affects our metal as well. Because we've taken it out of that folder, so that mask that's on the folder is no longer applying to it. I'm just going to hit Control Z and put it back because I like to have specific dirts and patterns for different things. So try planar on and turn that up. Contrast up. Don't want our level too high. And then let's adjust so want our metallic to be off, our height to be going up, because dirt builds up on the object, and bring our roughness up a bit so we're using that same kind of grime that we've got from the original one, or the original layer. I don't, however, like how this dirt is getting all very spotty on our grunge pattern here. Let's adjust that. Bring our height down a little bit. We just want the tiniest bit. Not enough so that it looks like it's sticking out so much as it's just barely on top. And the things I'm changing here now are some of the micro details, which don't make a whole lot of difference unless you're looking really close. So just trying to get the amount of dirt that we want to see, sort of thing. Let's turn our contrast down a bit. Spreads it out a bit, looks less bumpy. And we're going to call that good for our barrel, I think. Okay, so now we're done with kind of the basic, shape and texturing on our barrel. But let's say we wanted to add something, like rivets along these metal parts or scratches in the wood. So we can create a new layer, and in our new layer, let's use, I want smart materials. Let's use this polished metal, and I'm not going to drop it into the material mode. I'm going to drop it into the base color. And instead of brass, let's go with a custom metal. We'll copy our base metal and then make it a little bit darker. And we'll leave this as our setting for now. Want to make sure our metal is turned up. Roughness is okay there. And we want to put our height up. I'm going to put it all the way up just so it's a bit easier to see what I'm doing. And so if we add a black mask to that layer now, and then we add a paint layer. Let me get this out of the way. And we can see where did I put it? Right there. Right there. So we can see we've created this kind of weird shape, actually, which this isn't the shape we want. So if we come down in our paint properties, this alpha is our brush shape. So I'm just going to use that shape, but I'm going to put my hardness up a bit. Additionally, if you hold Control and right click, so left and right control the size of your brush, and up and down will control the hardness. It's kind of hard to see there, but you can see that like one line moving in and out. And so that's your hardness. And make that a bit smaller. Actually, now that I've put that on, I don't like that color, so I'm going to go with one of these presets and see copper. Yeah, sure. We'll go with copper. I changed that before. Looks kind of rivety. Bring our hardness up a bit more. And you can always just search for whatever brush shape you want. You can see when I hit the search bar, it gives us a whole bunch of different brush shapes. Some are, some are these really intricate patterns, which can be really fun to work with. But for what we need right now, I think our shape brush is going to be good enough for that. Cone shape paraboloid, that's what we want. And then if we adjust our hardness a bit, all the way up, let's see. So you will have to do a few, like, hit it, put it in, and then hit Control Z and see how it looks. Actually, I like it with the hardness all the way down. Okay, we're going to go with that one. So I just used the shape paraboloid brush, and then my hardness is all the way down. So there's a few ways that we can make this go all the way across. So if we go to our window and our views and we turn on the display settings, if you go way down to the bottom, you'll see a mesh wireframe, and you can click Show Mesh. And so this puts our wireframe on the object and our UVs. This happens automatically if we're using polygon fill, but when using the brush, you have to turn it on and off manually. And so I'm just going to put that to the side a little bit. And so, we can use our guidelines here, or our, mesh lines, and just individually put in where we want all these rivets to go. But that's fairly tedious and time consuming. So another thing we can do is we can adjust the spacing on our brush, which will push all of our pieces further along. And so then we just hit 1, and then we hold Shift, and it creates a straight line from point A to point B. So from the first thing we selected to the second, and just wraps it all the way around. The spacing might not be as perfect as if you've done it manually, but you can always hit Control Z, adjust the spacing a little bit more, and try it again. Oops. Sorry, I hit Control Z too many times and it changed my metal. Let's go back to that copper. There we go. Well, it's pretty good. That spacing is largely even. And you'll notice it doesn't go exactly to where my brush was set. And that's because it's following these spacing patterns. If I'd had my spacing like way down and I hit Shift, oops, it's going to put them a lot closer together. Even like, it can even form it into, just one single bar if you wanted. So your brush settings can make an absolutely massive difference. I'm at 350. Let's go 375 this time. All right, that spacing's not too bad. Again, it's not exact right on the lines, but it's pretty close. And if you're not looking at the wireframe, you're not really going to be able to see the very slight differences in the spacing. So I'm going to get rid of this display settings here. And you'll notice like our UV and object are kind of fighting for space right now. If we go up to the top there's this little symbol here. You can set it to 3D and 2D, which is the view we have now. 3D only to see just our object, or 2D only to see just our UVs. So I'm going to do that just so we have a bit better visibility. And I'm just going to do the exact same thing on all of these. And let's bring it back to our 3D and 2D. And there we go. So now our rivets are wrapping all the way around. And we're good with that. One thing though is that these rivets are now sitting on top of all of our dirt and our scratches and all that stuff. So I'm just going to rename this real quick. Very important. And then let's move it in the hierarchy because all of that matters. So let's bring it down. I'll bring it down below the edge wear. And so now you can see how it changed the way the lighting hits it. Some of the rust is showing up on top of them. And there we go. And so you'll notice, from far away, they look like they're riveted out. Once you start looking at the edge and looking real close, you kind of you can see that it's not actually, the height actually isn't changing, which is perfectly fine. If you are like me and you're checking out textures in video games and stuff, walk right up to the objects in your game and look at it from the side. You'll see that a lot of the detail in the things in your game are just done this way in the texture and not actually modeled in. So that's our rivets. Additionally, there is another way that we could do this, which is not what I would use for this one, but I will show you nonetheless because learning how to use your normal channel is important. So we create a new fill layer, and then let's go into our asset library, and this icon that's second from the last is our textures. And so you'll see a lot of these little blue buttons, and these are all using normal maps. And Substance Painter doesn't have anything I actually want to use as a rivet here, but let me just hide our rivets layer for now. I'll use one of these screws, I guess. Let's use this one. And then we're going to drop that onto our normal. And so you'll see it makes one big one. And I'm actually going to turn off everything on this channel except for that normal. And so, if we adjust our tiling, we shrink it down, but we're making, dozens of these screws that we don't really want. So you can change how it wraps and how it tiles. So if you look at the UV wrap in your property section, it's automatically set to repeat. We can change that to none, and then we're just left with the one screw shape here. And so I'm just going to hold Shift if you're using these arrows, because you'll lose your shape and your perspective. If you hold Shift, it keeps everything in the same ratio. And then just keep shrinking it down. There we go. And now we've got our our screw is set here. If we did want to repeat this, we can go back to our UV wrap, and it's got repeat horizontally. This is a bit too close together though. And so it's not something I would recommend using on this one. We can set it back to none and just duplicate our layer, move the new one over and set it, duplicate, and continue on this way, in order to set our normals in place. So using normals like this for adding, little details like screw heads or if you're doing anything sci-fi, all these little like niches and handles and stuff like that are super useful. Um, yeah, all these little vent pieces and stuff like that. Anything mechanical or sci-fi. This stuff will save you a whole lot of time when it comes to actually modeling, because you don't need to model in any of this stuff if you can just throw on a normal map for it. And again, once you kind of like set one full row, you can put that all in a folder. And then you can actually just duplicate the folder. Why are you not letting me move them? Really? Oh. Oh, okay. So never mind. Don't put them in a folder. It doesn't let you duplicate the folder and move them all. I thought it would. And let's just bring back our rivets here. And now, so same thing for if we wanted to do scratches. We would do it exactly the same way that we did the rivets, just with, changing our brush shape. So let's, oops, wrong button, don't want a folder. Let's add a new fill layer. And we'll add a black mask to it and a paint layer. And then in our alpha, we don't want this paraboloid shape anymore. So let's see, I think they have scratches, yeah. So we've taken this scratch shape, which, this brush in itself, if you look at the alpha, on any of these settings below it, apply to that brush. So this one has settings, so we can change the number of actual scrapes and stuff like that. I want to put my spacing back down just because I'm going to be using single click at a time for this. So I don't need a whole bunch of those. But, you could put your spacing up and then adjust your like size, jitter a bunch, change your flow and your angle jitter, position, and then, you can actually just, paint on your scratches however you want. Let's make it a bit bigger and put some big ones in there. But the thing with this now is you can see that we're on top. Well, for one, it's just white lines. So this is just showing you where the white is on the mask because we haven't set any of our material settings. So for this material settings, we're going to have these scratches on just the wood, so we're not going to need the metal setting. And for our base color, I'm actually just going to copy our wood, and then we're going to desaturate it. Because wood is always just that little bit lighter when you cut into it or scratch into it, right? And let's bring our roughness up so that things, it scratches so they don't actually, they're not going to have the same finish as the outside of the wood. And then let's bring our height down. And so you can see, just like with the rivets, we went up. Now we can go down. Can even adjust our ambient occlusion so they look a bit darker, a bit more kind of like self-shadowing. And so now we've got some scratches and some damage in our brush, or in our barrel. And again, you can spend a lot of time really customizing and fine-tuning these. I'm just doing it quick to show you. But you'll also notice like our scratches go over the metal here, which we don't want. But because we've already set up these folders that are masked out, we can just grab our scratches, bring them, and drop it into our wood folder. And so now the masks are covering everything that was running over the metal. And our scratches are just on the wood. And there we go. So yeah, and this is just the base minimum of what you can do with this. Like, I could put these scratches in its own folder and then layer things on top. So I'm using multiple different scratch brushes and stuff like that. And then we just do the same thing where we have, our folder, which would have scratches on it, and then we'd have our mask on the folder. Um, but for now, we're going to call this good. I do want to show you folks one other thing that I wouldn't use for this because we're doing a much more realistic looking prop right now. But if you were doing something cartoony and very stylized, oops, this method will save you a lot of time. Um, so I'm going to get rid of most of these. For anything cartoony and stylized, you want to have your roughness like almost all the way up. It's recommended not to go all the way to 1, as then it's not reflecting any light back, but 0.999 is totally fine. And then I'm just going to change my base color to, oof. Yeah, see, this is the effect that the roughness makes. Is like, it almost no light is reflecting off that. So we lose a lot of our color, and as a result, most things that are toon shaded or stylized have to be, much more saturated than if you were doing it realistically. But we'll call that one good enough. And so that's our base layer, and then we're going to add another layer with a black mask and a generator. And for this generator, we're going to use a curvature node. And so this curvature generator does not work if you've not baked, because it reads the geometry and the curvature from the bake to determine where it's putting all these lines and edges. And so using this, you can, adjust. I'm actually going to turn everything off. We just need the color on this. Let's make that a lot lighter. And so using this curvature generator, we can adjust, how much of the curvature it's reading and how far away. If you open the curvature settings, you can even adjust, much more details of it for what it's picking up. And you can also swap it to cavities or both. Cavities won't do anything on this model, but this is another asset I was working on for a different pack. And so, I made just basically a bunch of cylinders, and then I took it into for the low poly, and then I took it into ZBrush, and I sculpted all these flat bits and these curves and carves into it in ZBrush, and then baked that high poly version onto our low poly one. And so the curvature generator reads all of these flat bits and where the edges are, and kind of automatically fills things in for you. So it gives you this hand painted look, but it was all auto generated and you didn't have to actually paint it all yourself. And so it works all around there. Yeah, it's a massive time saver if you're doing, anything that's supposed to be like cartoony or cell shade or toon or stylized or anything like that. Yeah, which again for this one we're not going to use the curvature node, or the curvature generator. I just really wanted to show everyone that because I know in class we are doing a lot of stylized things just because we don't have the knowledge or the time to do the realistic stuff yet, and so this curvature generator will just save you that much more time. I'm just going to delete those layers and bring back our actual textures now. Okay, and so now we've got everything done and we just need to export. So Control Shift and E is the hotkey, or you can just go to File and Export Textures. And so this one is, we're going to be doing it for both Maya and Unreal. So I've selected my Maya project folder, and I've gone into source images, and I've already made a folder here. So this is the one with no ID for Maya. And we select the folder. And so for your output templates, for using Maya, you're going to want PBR metallic roughness. I'm going to use the PBR metallic roughness AO because I've also used ambient occlusion in making my textures here. And then file types, we want to use PNG or EXR. They just kind of keep the best resolution without compressing things or anything like that. You know, like using JPEGs are okay, but you're going to get some loss of information, and it's going to be a lot larger file size than using PNG or EXR. I'm going to go with 16 bits just to get that little bit more color and detail. And then for our texture set sizes, we set this in Maya when we first exported in our UVs. We set it to 2048. And we also, when we started this file, we picked the same size. You can change it here now if you want. So, 4096 is going to give us a better resolution than what we have right now. If you did get to a point where like, oh wait, I need to compress these down, they need to be a bit smaller because of like, I'm putting in a game engine and it's causing things to slow down, you can knock it down to a 1024 or 512 here. I'm just going to leave based on texture set sizes because I'm fine with that for now. And then make sure we've got our things set, and we hit export. And then that gave us all of our maps. And then I'm going to go back. I'm going to switch to the Unreal Engine 4 Pact, change my location, which I'm going to send this. I've already set up an Unreal Engine file for this, and my next video shows you how to do this. I'm going to send it straight into our Unreal Engine file. Based on each texture set. Okay. And export. And so that is kind of all you need to know for exporting. But let's say you wanted to make your own template. And actually, just to explain a bit more about what we did with the other ones that we chose. So the first one we chose for Maya was this PBR metallic roughness ambient occlusion. And so you can see that it gives us a map for each of these texture layers. So we've got our base color, roughness, normal, ambient occlusion, and metallic. And you've got all these symbols on the right. And so these symbols correspond with what type of map the export is going to be. And so roughness, ambient occlusion, and metallic are always grayscale maps. So you can see that GR here. And then normal and base color are always going to be RGB. They're full color maps. One thing you do want to pay attention to for your normal is what format it is using. So, the PBR metallic roughness, we want the OpenGL because that's what Maya uses. If we switch over to the Unreal Engine 4, we want DirectX because that's what Unreal Engine uses. You'll also notice that it's condensed now. So our maps look, we've got different outputs. And so what Unreal Engine does is it combines your ambient occlusion, roughness, and metallic into a single map. And since they're all grayscale maps, it puts one of those on each of the red, green, and blue channels. So we've got ambient occlusion on our grayscale, or on our red channel, roughness on our green channel, and metallic on our blue channel. And again, we want to make sure our normal is set to DirectX. So this would be your setup for exporting Unreal Engine. but let's say we wanted to create our own. And so this is just a demo dummy one that I've made. And so let's say we're creating a output template for Unreal Engine. So up here where it says create, we're going to want an RGB, and this one will be our base color. And then we're going to go over to our input maps, and where it says, or we find the base color one, just going to click and drag it onto there, and we want to go from RGB channels. Or sorry, from base color to RGB channels is what this is saying. And so now we've got our base color set. And then we also need our normal map, which our normal is going to be another RGB. So remember, RGB means full color. And so we're using Unreal, so we're going to take the DirectX one and we're going to drop it in there. You'll notice that these colors that they show, the colors themselves don't mean anything individually. They're just there as a way for you to quickly visually link which maps are going to which outputs. So it's our normal, and now for Unreal Engine we need our triple packed, which is going to be R plus G plus B. And so this will let us set each of those channels individually. So for R, we're going to take our mixed ambient occlusion, and these are all gray maps. So we're going to put gray channel for each of them. Easy way to remember which one is which is AORM. So if you get into the habit of naming your triple packed one like this, ambient occlusion, roughness, metallic, ambient occlusion, roughness, metallic. So they're always in order. It makes it really easy to remember what's what. Roughness, again from the gray channel, and metallic, again from the gray channel. Now, say we had some opacity on this object, and so parts of it were glass or see-through for some other reason. And we wanted to export the opacity channel as a mask so that we can put it on another object. So what we can do is, there's two ways. If you hit a gray channel, and then we're going to grab our opacity and drop it on. There's gray channel, and then there's alpha. And so anything like a mask that you're using for opacity or emissive, you want to use the alpha channel. And you'll see it gets that little black and white dot there. So that's how you know that's going to be a mask that's on the alpha channel. And so this is just an opacity mask in and of itself. If we wanted, we could even, we have this setting for R plus G, or RGB plus A. And so we could bring, say we had an emissive on this material. We could drop our emissive here, which is using the RGB channels. But we also need a mask for our emissive so that not everything is lighting up. And then we can drop it there and use our alpha channel. So now we've got our colors for our emissive, and then the mask for our emissive so that only the parts that we want glowing will glow. And yeah, that is, I think, kind of all you need to know for setting up your maps. So, or setting up your outputs, which, I'm giving you this information just so that you know it, but Substance Painter has so many built-in presets here on the side. It's very rare that you're going to need to make your own. But it's good to know for, if you have something like this and you're like, oh wait, no, I want to add, I'm using the PBR metallic roughness AO, but it doesn't have an emissive. So I want to add that emissive channel. And then do I need a mask for it or not? And now you'll know which you have to use. So that's it for your exports. The only other thing that we need to cover is what the color IDing does. And so you can see here our texture set list, we've only got one. And so the color IDing, we had it set up so we have one texture set for wood and one for steel. So we're going to have to change our model, but we want to keep in mind when we change our model, if it has different texture sets here, we're going to lose everything that's in our layers. So if I brought in another model, like I just wanted to tweak this one, and I brought it back to Maya and tweaked it, and then I wanted to re-upload it, and it's still got the same just Lambert 1 material applied, we can just change this model. It'll keep all of our work. But because we know that we're going to have different texture sets, none of these layers are going to stay. So what we're going to do is, we've already got them in a folder, so we're going to right click and go to create a smart material. And the smart materials are the second icon here in your asset shelf. This one just came up as metal, so I'm going to rename it as barrel demo metal. The name it automatically takes is whatever you've named your folder. So we've got barrel demo metal. Let's do it to this one as well. And creating smart materials like this can be super useful for time saving. So for that asset that I showed you, that stylized looking tent, I had a bunch of other assets to do with a similar style. And so I just created a smart material after I did the first one. And then every time I brought in a new prop, a new asset, I could just drag and drop that smart material onto the asset. I'd have to adjust a couple of the sliders just to compensate for changes in geometry and stuff like that. And then I was done. It took maybe about an hour or two to kind of get all the settings on the first prop that I wanted and like build the layers in how I wanted. But after that was done, texturing all the other assets took like 10 minutes each, sort of thing. So yeah, smart materials, especially ones that you make yourself, can really save you a lot of time. Some of the ones that are pre-made, some are good, some are not. It depends because they all have different levels of, different layers in them and different settings for them. So you kind of have to just experiment and play around with it. But we're going to go to change our model now. So hit Control S, make sure we save. And then we're going to edit and project configuration. And then here where it says file, we're going to select our low one with the ID. Hit open and hit OK. And so, as I said, we've lost all our material or all our layers, but you can see up here in the texture sets, now we've got steel and wood. And so it's split up our UVs. As I said before, this is entirely overkill for this prop. We were able to do it perfectly fine just by masking out the two different parts. You want to use this if you have something that has a lot of pieces, and because if you get a lot of pieces, then they start taking, like inside your 0 to 1 space, the shells start getting really, really small so you can fit them all in. So like that steam engine, for instance, that I showed you in the Maya video. I had several different materials on that because otherwise all the shells were super tiny and I lost any kind of definition and detail that I wanted to put in there. So I split it all up into different materials. The same using material IDing or color IDing is good for if you're using anything with a tiling texture. And so a tiling texture is basically any texture that doesn't have custom details on it. So let me just bring these back in here. And you'll see, our barrel does not look the same as it did before. That's because we haven't baked our new model. So I'm going to go back to our texture set settings and hit bake, and you'll see it's even removed our high poly mesh here. So let's grab that, bring it back in, adjust our cage, make sure we have no red, make sure we got all the right settings turned on. And we'll hit bake here. Okay, and then we return to painting mode, and there we go. So now it looks exactly like it did before, right? All our cuts and everything are on it. And so because we've got these things on different layers, we don't need these masks anymore, right? We can just remove them. Oops, not layer, remove mask. Because there's no way for these to interfere with each other. But yeah, as I was saying, for like, using tiling textures, so, we've added kind of like, custom edge wear and rust and stuff like that that we use generators. So these textures are made specifically for this barrel. If we'd wanted, we could have just used one texture that's just looks like wood planks and one texture that just looks like flat steel. And so then when we get into Unreal Engine, we can apply just the wood plank texture and the flat steel texture. We've got two different ones. But by using tiling textures in that way, we could say we had 8 different props, and 3 of them need wood, 3 of them need steel, and 2 of them need both. Now by using a tiling texture, we can cover all 8 of those props with just 2 materials. But again, you will lose out on things like custom details, like the scratches that we added specifically, or the way we built our edge wear and our rust. These are things that you can't copy over with a tiling texture. And then the only other big difference when using a tiling or using color IDing, when you export from Substance Painter, you're going to see you've got 2 different materials, and you can click it on and off to just export one if you want. But if you go to your list of exports, you'll see that all the materials that we would have exported for the entire barrel, all the different maps are like base color, normal, and are mixed. Now we get 2 of them. One for the steel stuff and one for the wood stuff. And so it's just going to be creating more materials in in Unreal Engine or in Maya, whichever you have to. But that's the biggest difference between the color IDing and not using it. Works great for if you're using tiling materials or if you've got a lot of UV shells that you're trying to cram into this small space. Additionally, you can use UDIMs to create additional space for the UV shells, but I'm not going to go into that because that's a whole other thing. And so I think we are good on our texturing of this. We've got all of our materials have been exported, and so I will see you all in the next video where I show you how to build your textures and import things into Unreal Engine. All right, thanks for watching, everyone.